Welcome to Highline College Professional Development Day 2015. Hey, if you want to download this workbook using Excel to calculate grades, many cool tricks, and follow along, click on the link below the video. Now, when you click on that link below the video to get this file, go all the way down to the other section at the bottom of that page. And in the Highline Professional Development Day section, you will find this file. Now, we're going to learn how to use Excel to calculate grades, and we're going to start at the basic and go all the way to some more advanced grading tricks. Now, this workbook, there's a blue sheet. That's the one we're going to be working on, but all the red sheets are exactly what it will look like after the video is finished. Not only that, but on this topic sheet, you can click any one of these. For example, subtract lowest 2, and it jumps right to that sheet. Not only that, but here's the topics. And if you look below the video posted at YouTube and click the Show More button, this table of contents will have a time hyperlink table of contents, so you can click and jump to any part of the video you want. All right, now we're going to start off with a basic grade template. So I'm going to click on the sheet Grade Template. Now, I've already typed names, student names, and some grades here because I don't want to bore you with a lot of typing. But I do want to show you some cool tricks for creating your gradebook template. So, for example, the first 5 assignments are quizzes. Then we have 3 tests and a final. So I want the labels up at the top just like I have names. I want quiz 1, quiz 2, quiz 3. Well, instead of typing it all out, I'm just going to type the word quiz space and 1. Now, I'm going to use Control and Enter to put what I typed into the cell and keep the cell selected. But notice, anytime you select a cell in the lower right-hand corner, that little green box is called a fill handle. Now, this is a selection cursor right here. But watch what happens to my selection cursor when I hover over the fill handle. It turns to a crosshair. That's what Bill Gates called it. I like to call it an angry rabbit. And watch this. I'm going to click and drag that fill handle with my angry rabbit. And look at the screen tip. It tells me quiz 4, quiz 5. It'll automatically increment numbers. So when I let go, that's pretty fast. We can do the same thing with test space 1. The idea is that there's text and a number at the end. So when I Control Enter, point to my fill handle, see my crosshair, click and drag, it'll automatically increment that number. Now I want to type final and enter. Now, anytime we have a grade template like this, I want to distinguish the column headers or field names at the top with formatting. And I want to distinguish it from the actual raw data. That means student names and numbers we're typing in. And then we'll have a slightly different formatting for our formulas. So I'm going to, with my selection cursor, highlight all the way from A5 to N5. And I have my ribbons collapsed. So I'm going to right-click and uncollapse them. Now I'm going to click on the Home ribbon. I want to go to the Fill bucket. That means we're going to pour some paint into the cells. And I'm going to choose something dark, like dark blue. Oh, I can't see the text at all. So I come over to the letter A, which is font color, and I'm going to select white. I also would like some borders. So I'm going to do all borders. Now notice over here, there's some text that's hanging over and doesn't quite fit. I want to come up and use this awesome feature in the alignment group, Wrap Text. And instantly, all my labels automatically wrap. Now I'd like to take my selection cursor and click and drag. And I'm going to drag a few rows down because I'm going to build this template with the idea that I may add more students or subtract them or use this template again after I delete the raw data. So I'm going to use the border button. Now I want to add some formatting up here because it's very important that for each assignment I know what the max is. So I'm going to add some borders. I'm going to highlight all the way to K1 and then use my borders. I'm going to add some reds. These are like our assumptions for grading. Later, we can change these, like if we wanted this quiz to be 25, and all of our grading will automatically update. Now, we're going to have formulas for total, percentage grade, decimal grade, and we're actually going to see 2 different ways to get the decimal grade. All of these are going to be formulas. So I'm going to highlight these, and I'm going to use what I always like, that green right there. You can use whatever color you want. I am consistent in all of the templates I use. I always use the same exact color. And here's why. Later, when we come to delete the raw scores and the student names, I don't want to accidentally highlight the formulas and delete them, right? So that's why it's a different color. It visually lets me know, boom, this is a formula. Now we're going to have a formula up here too, so I'm going to do the same thing. Now, adding a bunch of scores is easy. You click in the cell, and we can come up to home, and there's an auto sum. So watch when I click this. Wow, automatically it puts an equal sign in, which is always the first character in a cell when you have a formula. Then it has the built-in sum function. There's other functions like average and min for minimum. And then it's super polite. I just clicked on that button, and it looks like it guessed the actual numbers. Now, you always got to check the guess to see if it's right. Because these are all numbers, and that is a piece of text or a word, it knew to get all of those numbers. But check first. If it's not right, which a lot of times it's not, notice those dancing ants? That means it's in edit mode. So if it wasn't correct, I could actually click anywhere. And notice every time I click, it's correcting the formula in here. As long as the dancing ants are moving, you can redirect. It got it right. So now I'm going to Control and Enter to put that formula in the cell and keep the cell selected. Now, watch this. That little fill handle, I point my selection cursor, and when I see my crosshair, I click and drag to drag the formula down. Anytime you copy a formula down or drag a formula down, you want to go to the last one, click in the cell, and put it in edit mode with the F2 key. What I'm doing is I'm verifying that when I copied it all the way down, it is correct. And sure enough, this formula is adding up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 cells to my left. Escape notice in any cell, if I hit F2, the blue range is always looking 9 to my left. Now I want to come up to the top here. And I never want to use this button again because one of the more important keyboard shortcuts in all of Excel is the keyboard for the sum function. Now notice when I hover my cursor, it opens up a screen tip, and right there it says Alt equals. And by the way, you can do that for other buttons in the ribbon tabs. You notice that says Control B, Control I. So I'm noticing Alt equals. Because sum function is so common, they programmed its own keyboard. So you ready? I'm going to hold Alt and equals. Oh, that is amazing. Now, you always got to make sure that the dancing ants are around the correct range. Once we see that it's correct, I can simply hit Enter. So the max possible for this class is 650. You can see each one of the students has their individual total. Now, we want to calculate the percentage grade. And the way it is you compare the part to the whole. You compare the part to the whole. The part, that means part of the 650 to the whole. Now, I'm going to do this with a formula. And we want to build our formula. There's no button for calculate percentage. So we have to tell Excel that we're doing a formula in this cell. And the way you do that is you type an equal sign. Now, I need the total for SURadcoolinator, and then I need to divide it by the total for max score. So watch this. That selection cursor is different right now because if I'm in edit mode for a formula, wherever I click, it will put that cell reference or that range of cells into the formula. So what I want is a single cell, so I simply click boop. And there it is. Then I do the division symbol, divide. That's a /. And then I click on that 650 and Enter. Equals. Now, instead of using my mouse, if the cell reference is really close, you can use your arrow keys on the number pad. So I did left arrow, divided by, and I'm going to do up, 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 and left arrow. And just like that, I've calculated the percentage for battalion flowers. Now I need to do Chin Smith equals left arrow divided by up, 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 and then left and Enter. Now I want you to notice something. Once we get far enough away, at some point it's faster to do simply your mouse divided by that. But I want you to notice something. Notice the blue one is in relation to the formula, always one cell to the left. But the formula is always looking at K1. So watch. Enter equals, I'm looking one cell to my left divided by K1. Enter equals one cell to my left divided by K1. Now, I do not want to create all these formulas individually. I want to do just what I did over here. Create one formula and copy it down. So I want you to highlight all these and use the delete key. By the way, in Excel, you don't want to right-click delete because it'll actually remove the cells and shift everything up, and that can be trouble. So simply use your delete key. Now you ready? Click on the top cell. Equals one cell to my left divided by, and I'm going to click on K1. And let's just see what happens if I Control-Enter and copy it down one cell. Well, first off, Battalion Flowers is not going to light a divide by 0 error as his grade. But when I come here and hit F2, notice it's not K1. When I copied it down, it moved. These are called relative cell references. That K7 is not K7. It is one cell to my left. That K2 is not K2. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cells above me and one to the left. So when I Control-Enter and copy it down again, notice the relative cell references obeyed me. One cell to the left, 5 up, and 1 to the left. So that's not going to work. We're going to highlight those and use the delete key. Here's the secret. Equals one cell to my left, and that's a relative cell reference. We want that one to move. Divided by, and when I click on K1, I need to do something to that K1 to lock it. So when I copy it, it doesn't move. And the way you do that is you hit the F4 key, and it puts the secret code in. $signs lock down column K, $sign lock down row 1. It will not move when I copy it down now. Control-Enter. Copy it down. Now remember, our rule is once we copy, you always go to the last cell, hit F2 to put it in edit mode and verify. One cell to my left divided by locked on K1. That's pretty amazing. This is called an absolute cell reference, meaning it will absolutely always be K1. And that's a relative cell reference. In relation to me or relative to me, the formula, where should I always look? In our case, 1 to the left. Now, we need to calculate decimal grade. And we're going to need two things. We're actually going to need a formula. And the built-in function that looks up grades is called VLOOKUP. So we're going to need the VLOOKUP function here. And we're going to need an actual table that lists all of the percentage grades and the equivalent decimal grades. Now, before we do our formula with VLOOKUP, I want to talk about this table. Now, normally in a syllabus, the percentages would be 95, 94, 93, and the decimal grades would be 4, 3.9, 3.8. But if we're going to use the VLOOKUP function, the table has to be sorted from smallest to biggest. Not only that, but there has to be a 0 to start off. So if your grading scale goes from 94% down to 61%, you actually have to start at 61%. And I'm going to type 0.61, enter 0.62. So we're incrementing by 0.01. Now, I don't have to type all of these. I'll show you a great trick to automatically create that whole column. But now 0.61 represents a decimal grade of 0.7, enter. 0.8, enter. So there's our two decimal grades. And now we have established a pattern, 0.61, 0.62, and 0.7 and 0.8. We can create the entire table by simply highlighting. And notice there's that fill handle, and we use the fill handle to do test 1, test 2, test 3, and to copy formulas. But watch this. I point to the fill handle, and when I see my angry rabbit, I click and drag. And notice the screen tip is saying 0.66, 0.67, 0.68. So I can simply drag until I see 0.94. And you got to be kidding me. It got it exactly right in both columns. That trick only requires that you establish the pattern with two numbers. Now we have our table. We will tell the VLOOKUP over here to look up the decimal grades for each one of the students, or the percentage grades when we format it. The VLOOKUP will look through this column, find a match, jump over, get the decimal, and bring it back to the cell. Now, I actually want to do this manually before I do the VLOOKUP, because if you think through the process of looking up a grade, getting the decimal and bring it back, if you think through it manually, then when you get to the VLOOKUP function, it makes perfect sense. Now, I want to look this up. So I'm going to look at this cell right here, 0.907, and I'm going to remember it. Then I'm going to go racing through this column, 0.07, 0.07. I'm coming down here. This is not bigger, not bigger, not bigger. I keep looking through here. Remember, we're looking for 0.907, and I finally see the first number that's bigger. And that way I know to jump back. So this is my row. And then I jump over to the second column of this grade table, right? 1, 2. I get the 3.6, and I bring it back, and then I would type it in the cell. Now, that's manually, right? But check this out. Let's use VLOOKUP to automate this process. So I'm going to type equals V, and anytime you type a letter, it thinks you want a function. Then I'm going to type L, and sure enough, there's VLOOKUP. And I'm going to hit the Tab key to accept the blue highlighted function tab. Now, the reason it's called VLOOKUP, well, we're looking something up, right? But what does that V mean? The V means the table is oriented vertically, right? So we have vertical percentage grades, vertical decimal grades. Now, we're going to read the screen tip. And if I type a comma, it jumps to each one of these screen tips. I'm going to backspace, backspace. Now, the lookup value, just like we would look at this cell with the number and remember it, VLOOKUP has to look at a number and remember it. So I click on that cell right there. Now I'm going to type a comma to get to the next argument. And notice lookup value is bold. But when I type a comma, table array is bold. So the screen tip is polite. As soon as you type a comma, it says, hey, I need you to put in the table array. Now, this is the whole table. And the way I remember it is it has the word table in it, right? So that means I need to give it the whole table. Now, I'm going to highlight the first two cells and then click and drag all the way down. And when I get to the bottom, and now I'm going to scroll back up. And you notice P6 to Q40, that's the whole table. But remember, I'm going to copy this formula down. That blue one definitely needs to be relative, so it moves as we copy VLOOKUP down. But that table needs to be locked. I do not want it to move. I want every single cell to look at the entire table. So I have to hit the F4 key. Now I type comma. It wants to know column index number. Now, we know that the second column has the decimal, or we, if we were using our eyes, would just say, hey, it says decimal grade. So we know that the grade we want to go and get and bring back to the cell is in the decimal column. But VLOOKUP also needs to know which column is it. Is it the first column or the second column? So we simply type a 2 in. That tells VLOOKUP that the thing it's getting and bringing back to the cell is in the second column. Comma. And then we need to choose between approximate match or exact match. Now, exact match is like when you're looking up an employee name to get an email. For approximate match, it means we have gaps between the numbers. So to get a 1.3, you can get 0.67 all the way up to, but not including 0.68. There's a lot of numbers that can fit in that category. So that's why they call it approximate. And that's exactly what we want. So I'm going to double click this. True, close parentheses. And now when I Control Enter, it calculates the grade for us. If I copy this down, it calculates all of the decimal grades. Now let's just try this. 0.675. If I were to do this manually, I'm looking for the first bigger number, which is 0.68, so I know to jump back. And then that's the decimal grade that should be there. And sure enough, VLOOKUP did it perfectly. Now, I want to make a mistake here and then see that it's not really a mistake. I kind of like percentages, so I'm going to highlight these. And then I'm just going to take what they offer up in the number group on the home ribbon tab. I'm going to click this. Now, I don't really like this percentage number formula because watch, whoop, it shows 0 decimals. Now, I want to go ahead and try and do it manually. If I'm looking on the surface of the spreadsheet, I see 91%. So I'm going to just try this. I'm going to go down here, and I'm thinking I want to do this manually. Ding, 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 ding. So I find the first number bigger, which is 0.92. And sure enough, there it is, 0.91. 3.7. So I jump back here. Oh, man, VLOOKUP's not doing it right. No, no, no. We got tricked by number formatting. Remember, all those unrounded decimals were there? When I highlighted this and clicked that button, it just displayed it with 0 decimals. So I want to highlight this and use the increased decimals. And I can increase it as many times as I want. All of those decimals are still in the cell. It's just that number formatting displays it to look like it's 91, but it's really not. That formula, if I hit F2, does not look at number formatting. It looks underneath at the unrounded number. So if you're going to use percentages, just be aware of that. I'm going to include at least a couple extra decimals. That way, since I only have 2 decimals here, I'll always be able to find the correct match. All right, so that's pretty amazing that VLOOKUP can do the heavy lifting. Now I want to show you a second way because we don't have to use percentages. We could have just used the actual total here. Now I want to copy this whole table here, and I got to show you a great trick. Now we could just click and drag down here, but once I have gone down a little bit, I can use a keyboard to highlight all the way down to right above the first row where there's empty cells. And the keyboard is Control-Shift and down arrow. And sure enough, look at that. It jumped all the way down. Now I want to copy this, Control-C, and then I'm going to click in S3 and Control-V. Now I'm going to change this label up here, F2, and I'm going to say not for percent, but for total. Now this doesn't have a total, and I'm even going to put here total. And what would I do to get a total? Well, I'm going to make a formula. I already have my table over here. 61% represents 61% of that 650. 62%, or the decimal equivalent, 0.62, represents 0.62 or 62% of that 650. So to get the total, I can simply say relative cell reference 1, 2, 3 to my left times K1, and I want to lock it using the F4 key. Control-Enter. And then watch this. I'm going to double click, and it automatically sends it down. That's yet another amazing trick for the fill handle and our angry rabbit. And when you go down to the bottom, sure enough, 611 is the minimum number of points you can earn and get a 4.0. That's exactly 94% of 650. Now, what's nice about having this right here, yes, you have to figure out what the totals are, but you actually don't need this column at all. We can do VLOOKUP to actually look up total points. So let's do it. And it will give us exactly the same answer. Equals VL. I see VLOOKUP is blue, so I hit Tab. I'm going to use my arrow key, arrow, 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 to get the total. And remember, that's 1, 2, 3 cells to my left. So when I copy it down, it will move. I see the screen tip lookup value. I type a comma, table array, and we're going to learn a different way to highlight. All I have to do is highlight the first 2, and then use Control-Shift down arrow to highlight all the way down. Notice it got all the way down to 611 and 4. And I need to lock it. So watch this. I'm going to hit the F4 key, and not only does it lock it, but it jumps the cell right back into view. Comma to get to the next argument, column index number. I'm counting column 1, 2. 2 has the thing I want to go and get and bring back to the cell, so I type a 2, comma, and get this. That screen tip range lookup, we're supposed to tell it, hey, do approximate match or do exact match. We're not doing exact match here. But guess what? That screen tip has a square bracket, and that square bracket means if you know what the default is, you do not have to put that argument in. And the default for VLOOKUP is approximate match. So if you're doing grades or taxes or commission rates, when you're doing approximate, you don't even have to put this argument in. I'm going to backspace. Notice I'm in column index number, and I'm looking square brackets. I know what the default is. It's approximate, so I'm not even going to put that in. Close parentheses. Control Enter, and copy it down. All exactly the same. Now, this template we built here, if I control and roll the wheel on my mouse to zoom in, it's pretty amazing because any one of these scores or any one of these max scores, if we change them, everything will update. If I come GG Powers, test number 2, it wasn't really 71.8. It was actually 98.5. And watch this. When I enter or control enter, everything will update perfectly. Not only that, but if I came up here and changed this, and I wouldn't want to change this here because all these people got scores based on 100. But for next quarter, if I change this to 75, all of these formulas actually will work fine. And if you look down at the bottom of this table, it's no longer 611. It's now 587.5. So that's why we do it in Excel. Now I'm going to Control Z and Control Z to undo that. Now there are some other cool things we can do with grading that we will look at through the rest of the examples in this video. One is if we wanted to delete all this and not show zeros. We'll see that in our next example, Control Z. We'll also see some cool things like subtracting the min value, using weights, and even calculating the current grade as you enter the scores. All right, so let's go over to our next sheet, Calc Appear sheet. Now on this sheet, I've already F2, I already have the sum, F2, the percentage grade, and F2, the VLOOKUP. And all I want to do is I want to be able to delete all of those and not see zeros. Not only that, but as I add new students, I want the formulas to automatically appear. Control Z. So in essence, what I want in this column is I either want the sum function or I want nothing. And the trigger to determine whether we're going to have that sum function or nothing is going to be, have we typed anything into this cell? Now I want to come up to the very top and hit F2. Anytime you have one of two things that you need to put in a column, either the formula or we're going to learn the syntax for nothing, which is double quote, double quote. Anytime you have one of two things you want to put into a cell, you can use the if function. So I'm going to type right after the equal sign IF. And now I have a second function, the if function, in my formula. Now, the if function is pretty straightforward. We're going to need to give it a logical test. That's some test that comes out true or false. And for us, it's going to be, hey, have we typed anything in the cell yet? And then the rest of the if is easy. You tell it what to put in the cell if true and what to put in the cell if false. Now, the logical test I'm going to use is I'm going to use another function, ISB is blank, and I'm going to hit the tab key. Is blank asks if a cell is empty. Now close parentheses, comma. And that means if I click on the screen tip logical test right there, is blank. As I copy this down, right now it'll say false because it's not empty. False, 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 false. But when it gets down to here, it'll say true because there's nothing in the cell. That means the value, if true, is not going to be the sum because I don't want the sum when it's empty. I want the syntax for nothing, which is double quote, double quote. Now I type a comma, and then the value of false is going to be the sum. So get this. Is blank, right now I ask the question, is this empty? False. So the sum function will get put in. Now I'm going to close parentheses, Control Enter, and watch this. Now we get to copy it all the way down. Now I want to click in this cell right here in F2. Right now, the logical test is blank is asking, is that cell empty? True is the answer. So then in the value if true, the if function will dump double quote, which is the syntax to show nothing. Now technically, double quote is a 0-length text string. But for our formula, it will simply show nothing. And here's the test. If I come over here and type a new student name, Fran Butte. Now notice I haven't hit Enter or Tab, and I see nothing. As soon as I hit Tab, boom, that formula shows up. As soon as I type a score, it starts calculating. Now I'm going to Control Z, Z. Now I need to F2. I need to actually do the same thing to each one of these other columns. So watch this. I'm going to cheat. I'm just going to copy, and I'm actually going to copy all the way to the comma. So I got the if, the is blank, the double quote on the comma. Control C, escape. Now I'm going to come over to the second formula, F2, and right after the equal sign, Control V. Now I need to very carefully, because value of false is the formula, I want to come to the end and type close parentheses. Control Enter. And then I'm going to copy it down. Now I'm going to come over here, F2. After the equal sign, Control V. At the end of the formula. And be careful if you're clicking at the end of the formula, you've got to make sure that you see the I-beam, not this. Because if you start clicking with the selection cursor, it will throw cell references in. So once I see my I-beam, click, close parentheses, and I can tell I'm done because the screen tip goes away. Control Enter, and copy it down. Now let's watch this. Tab, boom, there it is. My formulas show up. I'll enter some scores. And when I hit Tab, all of the formulas are working perfectly. And the great thing about this template is now, at the end of the quarter, I can simply delete. None of the zeros are showing, but as soon as I start entering student names over here or anything over here, boom, the formulas show up. And we've properly formatted it so we know there are formulas there, even though it looks like there's nothing in all the cells. I'm going to Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, and leave it right there. Now we want to go over. I'm going to scroll over, and I want to go to the sheet Weighted Grades, because we got to talk about weights. Sometimes teachers have actual maximum points for each one of the assignments and a particular weight. So this assignment is only weighted 5%. The first test, the second test, and third test, 15% each. And the final is 25%. So how in the world do we incorporate these weights into our grading? Because this won't work. F2, well, that's the total. F2, that's not going to work either, because that total includes all of the points not weighted. Now, guess what? If I look at VLOOKUP and the percentage formulas, those will work fine. We only need to fix the total for max scores, which is our denominator for our percentage, and the actual students' total. Now, here's what we would have to do. We'd have to take 0.5 times 30 plus 0.5 times 30 all the way to the end. 0.15 times 100 plus 0.25 times 200. That is a huge, horrible formula. And watch this. I'm going to take weight times score plus weight times score plus weight times score plus weight times score. Oh, my heavens. I never want to have to type this formula again. That is ridiculous. Not only is it hard to type out, but it's error prone. But when I hit Enter, I got 104. That's the correct number. But watch this. Let's just hit F2 and look at the pattern of this. Notice that it really looks like there's a range. 1 row by 9 columns times 1 row by 9 columns. If we could multiply each one of the elements and then add them without having to do this huge formula, that would be perfect. Now, let's think about this. What we really did is we multiplied and then added. Well, synonyms for multiplication and adding are product and sum. And guess what? There's an actual, and I'm going to delete this. Those divide by 0 errors will be fixed in just a second. There's an actual function that is called SUMPRODUCT. product. And that's exactly what we want. And you're not going to believe this function. You just put array, which means a range of cells, and they have to be exactly the same dimensions. And then it will multiply the ranges and add them. So watch this. I'm going to highlight the weights. And then array 1 is a 1 by 9 dimension range, comma. And in array 2, I'm going to put a 1 by 9 dimension range, close parentheses. And SUMPRODUCT will automatically go multiply, multiply, multiply each one of the elements, and then add them. And when I Control Enter, that is amazing. That formula is what? 16 times faster than this monstrosity over here. Oh, my heavens. Now, I do want to, before we do our weights for our total here, anytime you have weights like this, I want a check formula that will tell me whether all of these add up to 1. Because if they add up to more than 1, I may not get the result I want. So I'm going to Alt equals to get the sum function. It looks like it has the right range, and Enter. 1. Now, so we got our verification that these all add up to 1. We have the denominator. So the maximum number of points you can get in this class is 104. And this column right here doesn't have the if and is blank like we used in our last one. You could add those if you want, but I'm going to delete this. Well, what do we want? Well, of course, we want SUMPRODUCT. But we have an array 1 and array 2 that's slightly different. We definitely want the weights. But guess what? When I copy this formula down, I do not want those blue cells to move as relative cell references. So I have to hit the F4 key to lock it, comma. And then array 2, these are relative cell references. I always want to look 9 cells to my left. And that's it. Close parentheses, Control Enter, and copy it down. So each one of these students now have a proper total we can compare against the maximum number of points for the class. These percentages work fine, and the VLOOKUP works also. So that's how to do weights. Now we want to scroll over and look at yet another trick. Sub lowest. We just want to see how to subtract the lowest score. So I'm going to click on sub lowest 1. Now, on this sheet, we have those same formulas, sum, percent, and VLOOKUP. And all we want to do is this grading scheme always has to subtract from the quizzes the lowest quiz score. So we're going to have to amend the denominator and the numerator. So we come up here, F2, and I simply need to subtract. And I'm going to use the min function. The min is for minimum, and it finds the smallest one. Now, all of our quizzes are exactly the same. Here, it doesn't matter which one we subtract. But there we go. It will take from the quizzes exactly 1 total quiz score. Control Enter. So the total now on the denominator is 620. Now I can come down here, F2 minus, and the min. And now only the quizzes. Close parentheses, Control Enter, and copy it down. Now I did this all in one column here. You absolutely could break it apart. So visually in your gradebook, you can see which one was subtracted. But that's it. It's as simple as that. Now what if you wanted to subtract the smallest quiz and the smallest test? Well, let's go over to the next sheet. Sub lowest 2. Not too hard. We can F2, and instead of just using a single min to get the quiz scores, close parentheses, we then subtract a second min. Looking at just the test, we're going to keep the full final score. Close parentheses. So there it is, sum minus min, min. And that will be the denominator. Now I want you to notice something. These are relative cell references looking always to the left, and it's the same formula we're going to need down here. Escape, so I'm going to Control C. Highlight all of the cells with the sum function, and Control V. And just like that, if I F2, you can see, sure enough, for SURADCoolinator, it's going to subtract the 20 and the 82. Down here for GG Powers, F2, going to subtract, Looks like the 22.3, oh, and the 60.2. So sum minus min of quizzes minus min of tests. Now, what if we had a slightly different situation? What if we wanted to actually, from just the quizzes, subtract the two smallest values? Well, if we scroll over, there's a sheet sub lowest 3, and it's not really 3. It's just the third example of subtracting the lowest. And for this example, I actually would like to insert a column. So I'm going to click on K, the K column header, right click. And because I'm selecting the actual column header, when I click Insert, it will simply insert a whole column. Now I'm going to copy this formatting. Watch this, right clicking on the mini toolbar, the Format Painter, which copies just formatting, boop, and it works on an entire column. So right click mini toolbar, that paintbrush to copy just the formatting, and boop. Now we want to learn about a new function, not the min function, but there's a small function. Now let's go ahead and give it the range for quizzes, comma, and the K. Well, if we put a 1 in here, that makes small exactly like the min function. It means it'll find the first smallest, and sure enough, it found 20. F2, if I change this to 2, it'll find the second smallest, which of course is 23. F2, but what we want to do is get tricky here. We want to tell small function, get the first and the second smallest simultaneously. And so the way you do that in the K argument is you have to put 1 and 2, but you have to put it in curly brackets. 1, comma, 2, close curly bracket. This is actually array syntax in Excel. In order to enter an array of items, it has to be in those curly brackets. Now, watch this. When I hit Enter, we're going to get confused for a second. We're like, huh? Wait a second. I just told it to get the two smallest. Well, any formula that is delivering multiple items cannot display them both in the cell because the cell can only hold one value. But watch this. We're going to learn an important trick. If I highlight the entire small function, I want to evaluate it and see if, in fact, it really is delivering two values. And the way you do it with the keyboard is you hit the F9 key. And sure enough, it is simultaneously delivering the first and second smallest. Now, I'm going to undo this in a second, but realize that Excel cannot display both of those values in a cell, but the sum function can certainly take two values and add them. So Control Z to undo that F9, and that's ultimately what we want. We want to take the two smallest values and add them. So when I Control Enter, boom, there it is, 43. So when I copy this down, there's the sum of the two smallest. So I simply type. And when I hit Enter, it looks like I didn't get wrap text. I thought I had wrap text there. So I'm going to click in that cell, go up to Home, and in the alignment, I want wrap text. Now I can simply amend this, F2, and I want to subtract, boom. And so now the total for each student is correct. They're not going to be happy with that because guess what? We don't have reflected in our total up here. We also need to subtract the two smallest. Now watch this. Both of these formulas and this one are looking at relative cell references. So I'm going to Control C for both of those two different formulas. Click up here and Control V. And now it gets it right. This denominator subtracted the two smallest, and this small function got the two smallest. And now everything is working. Now we have one last example here. And I want to scroll over to the sheet Current Grade. And here's the situation. I want to be able to enter quizzes and tests or whichever assignment and have the percentage grade and the decimal grade reflected only based on the current assignments. Now what that means is for the total, that's working fine because the sum function's only adding the current assignments. But when I get over to my percentage and I'm going to hit F2, the numerator's right, But the denominator, that's everything. That's why VLOOKUP is giving 0 scores to everyone. So what we need in the denominator is not 650. We actually need 100 plus 60, so we need 160. Not only that, but I need this formula to accurately reflect. If I come over and enter a score 87 here, then the actual denominator needs to be the 2 maxes for the tests and the 2 maxes for the quiz, which would be 260. Now, I want you to notice something, that how did we decide which max scores to go and get and add? Well, it came from the fact that we entered a number here. So here's what we're going to do in this formula over here. We're going to amend it. And we're only going to add when there's some numbers entered down here. Now, that means we're adding from this full range here with the condition data entered down here. And the perfect function for adding with conditions is the SUMIFS functions. Now I'm going to highlight this and delete all those. And I want to just work on the denominator first. Equals SUMIFS. And SUMIFS simply means sum if some condition is true. And the S means we can have one or more conditions. Now our sum range, we need to give it all the max scores. And we need to lock it with the F4 key, comma, criteria range. That's the current row of scores, comma, and the syntax for not empty, and this is going to seem weird, is less than symbol, greater than symbol, in double quotes. Yeah, there's no not symbol, so they had to make something up. So it's in double quotes, less than, greater than. And that'll mean not empty. And you're not going to believe this. Close parentheses, Control Enter. That's exactly the sum of the numbers from the max range determined by data entered down here. And watch this. If I delete this right here, instantly it updates to 160. So that's our denominator. F2, and now I simply take total from the sum function divided by. And when I enter this formula, Control Enter, and copy it down, VLOOKUP will work perfect. Only on the current percentage based on the grades entered in over here. So if I enter 98, instantly it updates. Control Z. Wow, that was a lot of cool tricks for grading. On this sheet, we saw how to create a formula to calculate current percentage and current decimal grade. On the sheet sub lowest 3, we saw how to subtract the 2 lowest quiz scores using the small function. Back here on sub lowest 2, we saw how to subtract the smallest quiz and the smallest test score. On sub lowest 1, we did, hey, just subtract the lowest quiz. Back on the sheet weighted grade, we saw how to calculate our formulas when we have a weighted grade situation. Back on calc up here, we saw that totally cool if and is blank to turn on and off our formulas based on whether a name is entered in the first column. And back on grade template, we started off by building our initial grade template. All right, we'll see you next video.